4.1 Sport and Exercise Science Methods Research. I'm going to be explaining these 4 key concepts. Firstly, BASIS. BASIS stands for British Association of Sport and Exercise Science. BASIS produces a code of conduct that oversees how sports scientists work as practitioners and researchers. The code of conduct outlines ethical and legal issues that are important for safe research within sports science. Secondly, Institutional Ethics and Review Committee. As a researcher, you need an application that needs to be reviewed, for example, by a committee. A committee will do one of 4 things with your application. Grant ethical clearance participant to minor amendments, for example, children under the age of 18. Grant ethical clearance participant to major amendments over 18, or not grant ethical clearance at all. Thirdly, ethical clearance. You should be working ethically and legally, and before you begin your work, you should gain ethical clearance from an appropriate member. For example, if you're doing an experiment on a school, you would want the clearance of the headmaster. You must get this clearance before you start your project. There are 10 key codes of the unethical clearance, which are your place of study and academic background, the achievements in this specific area of research, the title and purpose of the study, the methodology and participants to be included, how will you inform the participants of the procedures, the risks and how you will gain consent, how can you ensure your participants can withdraw at any time, how can you maintain participant confidentiality. Lastly, risk-benefit analysis. The risk-benefit analysis shows us the risks and benefits of the experiment and whether the risks outweigh the benefits within the experiment. For example, if we were going to experiment on children doing rock climbing, would it be suitable to do it at to let them climb 20 meters? I think that the risk would outweigh the benefit. The Nuremberg Code. The Nuremberg Code is a set of research ethics and rules for human experimentation, set as a result of the subsequent Nuremberg trials at the end of the Second World War. The Nuremberg Code was introduced in August 1947 after the Nuremberg trials, where the Nazi doctors were convicted of the crimes committed during the concentration camps. It attempted to give clear rules about what was legal and what was not when conducting human experiments. The Nuremberg Code has 10 rules to it, or codes. Firstly, voluntary human consent is essential. Experimental results should result in good for society. Anticipated results should justify the experiment. Avoid all unnecessary physical and mental suffering. No experiment if there is a chance of death or disability. Minimize risks of subjects. Proper preparations and facilities to protect subjects. Experiments conducted only by qualified persons. Subjects can withdraw at any time. Terminate experiment if results are known or with best judgment. And that's it. The Declaration of Helsinki. The Declaration of Helsinki is a set of ethical principles regarding human experimentation developed for the medical community by the World Medical Association. And this is a set of ethical principles for research conducted on human participants. The first version was adopted in 1964 and has been amended 7 times since. Scenario 1. With this scenario, there are 3 good things and 3 bad things. Firstly, the 3 good things were the participants were all volunteers. When doing an experiment, it is important that the participants are volunteers. This is because they are giving their consent to allow you to do their experiment on them. Also, there was a debrief used, which is very important when using deception in your experiment, so that at the end of the session, you are allowed to explain and give detail of what actually happened during your experiment. Finally, professional conduct. Professional conduct involves ethics, morals, and standards of behaviour. Being a professional is necessary for the person to maintain their ethical behaviour and to have good professional conduct. The bad things with this scenario are deception. Deception is deliberately misleading information to a participant. Some feel they should never deceive. Some people feel that you should never deceive, but some believe it's necessary to maintain validity. There are two types of deception. Firstly, omission, which is passive deception, which you may leave something out of your experiment, and there's commission, which is actively lying and missing something out within your experiment. Have no informed consent. This was a bad thing because this was not included. Informed consent is very, very important when doing an experiment. This is because once you have gained ethical approval for your research project, you need to the informed consent. This is an ethical and legal requirement of research. It can be verbal, but is safer for both you and your participants if you obtain it in writing. A consent form consists of a description of the investigation, details of the procedure to be followed, details of any risks to the participants, details of the potential benefits of taking part in the research, a section that offers to answer any questions in the section that any questions have been answered fully, and indication that the participant can withdraw at any time without being penalized. A section that explains that any information collected about the participant will remain confidential. And finally, there was no health and safety in this scenario. When conducting research, a key concern is the participant safety. Researchers must maintain the highest professional standards so that none of the participants are in danger, or the researchers themselves. Researchers should treat all participants equally and only work within their own area of competence. The corrections that can be made to these bad errors in this scenario are, well, for example, the debrief was made, which is a very good improvement, which is essential when there is deception involved. Also, when there is no informed consent, to ensure participants have, you must ensure that participants have informed consent. This is because everyone is taking play. This is because it is a legal requirement, and if you do not have this informed consent, the consequences may be that you might have to be involved in a tribunal with the directors board of the people that you are experimenting and the people in charge, and then this could lead to a fine or even imprisonment depending on the severity of the experiment and how badly it affected the participants. A correction with having no health and safety is that you could check the venue to see if the experiment was safe to take place and the condition of the participants were okay. The consequences with no health and safety is that it could lead to physical harm and even a suspension or loss of job. The second scenario. The good things with this scenario were that the participants had the right to withdraw. This is very important when doing an experiment, because if the participants don't have the right to withdraw, they will be forced to carry on with the experiment, which could lead them to physical harm and emotional harm. Another good thing with this scenario is the confidentiality and anonymity, which is very important. This is because having confidentiality when information is potentially embarrassing or harmful to a participant. And finally, there was good informed consent. The bad things with this scenario were there was scientific misconduct, and the corrections they could have made was to put more research into it, as there would have been plagiarism involved. The consequences of this is that it could have led to a tribunal, then a loss of job, or it shows unprofessionalism, and therefore they may seek advice and not be capable of doing it on their own. Therefore, they may lose their research credibility. Another bad thing with this scenario was the lack of research and responsibility. They need to be a correction. However, a correction could be that they need to do more they need to be more responsible by looking over and researching more into the substance, as well as having more competence with themselves and the knowledge of the experiment. You could lose your BASIS accreditation. The consequences of this is you could lose your BASIS accreditation for having a lack of knowledge and endangering your participants. Finally, the last scenario. The three good things with this scenario are that there was a participant disclaimer. This is very important. This is because the participant disclaimer is very important, because if the participants are a concern, they must be referred to a GP, and as a researcher you need to protect yourself by saying to the participants that if they choose to participate, they are doing it at their own risk, and that the researcher has nothing to be involved if there is an accident. Another good thing with the health and medical screening questionnaire, another good thing with scenario 3 is the health and medical screening questionnaire. This is because as a researcher you must you must know if the participants are medically well enough to participate in the experiment. Thirdly, the data protection. This is very important when participating in an experiment, and it is important that because the data protection is all the personal information of the participants, and therefore if it does get leaked, this is very, very bad on the researcher's behalf, because all of the personal information from the participant will be known by the other participant, who may tease them, bully them, emotionally harm them. The bad things with the scenario 3 is the inequality and impartiality. This is because it shows that the experiment is biased. However, the improvements that can be made is that more time can be spending time on the research will make it less impartial and less biased. However, the consequences with it being impartial is that is ethical training, which would be a necessary cause because of the biasness, and therefore you have to go through more training to know the right and wrongs of the experiment. Lastly, there will be no informed consent, and as we know from the first scenario, would be very traumatizing to the researcher, as they would because in this case they are letting the personal information of the participants into the open world, and therefore they should, as an improvement, they should be more understanding, and they should not allow any of this research to be released, and which could consequent in personal info. This could consequent in emotional harm and even physical harm, depending on the who finds out about this information.